Hello, dental online trainers, and welcome to the Dental Online Training Sharecast. I'm your host, Dr. Dennis Hartlieb. Each month, I'll be talking with dental experts who are doing amazing work in the field of dentistry and talk about how they got to be where they are today, what their influences were, and their journey in the world of dentistry. And as a bonus, I'll occasionally throw in a few of my solo bonding sharecasts, where I share a little of my experience with you about what's going on in my practice and lessons that I've learned along the way. So tune in every other week to hear our latest episode. Hey, dental online trainers, thank you for tuning back in to our Sharecast episode with Dr. Gary DeWood. This episode is a two-part interview, so if you missed the first part, please go back and check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So sit back and enjoy the rest of this conversation with Dr. Gary DeWood. You're in private practice and having a very successful practice. And then all of a sudden, and I know it's not all of a sudden, but then I want to talk about that transition as you got into Pankey, because you became clinic director at Pankey, correct? That was your role?
Clinical director is yes, that was the official title.
So were you taking Pankey classes as you were, so at what point in your career did you start taking back in the day, so back in the 80s, for those who aren't aware, there was not a lot of options for CE for dentists other than Chicago Midwinter Meeting, Greater New York Meeting, all this sort of big meetings and your local study clubs. But back then, they didn't really bring in speakers like what we do so much today. It was really Pankey was kind of the CE thing out there, right?
Yep.
So how'd you get introduced, and when did you start with Pankey?
Well, two things happened. One was when I was in dental school. At Case, we had fourth year, you had what was basically called your preceptor. I worked with one person. I had one faculty member, which means that I could literally walk in my operatory and do whatever dentistry I needed to do on those people by asking one person. So
That's wonderful.
Never my treatment plans, did all the stuff. By the way, if we had to deal with a specialty, they came to our operatory to see our patient with us.
Imagine that.
It was awesome. And halfway through that, the person who was my preceptor became a good friend of both Cheryl and I. His name is John Kelly, and John was awesome. John's only 3 years older than me, but he's a really smart guy, and his dad was a dentist, and he went through 2.5 years of undergrad and got into dental school. So he had been out for several years, practiced half-time. The way that preceptorship worked there was preceptors were half-time faculty. They came 3 days one week, 2 days the next. I was allowed to see my patients in that window. All the other time that he wasn't there was my prep time.
Got it.
I had to be doing stuff to get ready for that stuff.
Sure.
We did all of our own lab work. I mean, we did everything.
Yeah.
As you remember, that's what we did.
For sure.
And so John, when we were all done with everything, and actually he paid one of the highest compliments I've ever gotten. When we came back mid-year after Christmas, after the holiday break in January, the first day we're all back, and he said, he's out in the middle of the clinic, and he goes, "Hey, Garrett, come here and talk to you." So I walk over, and he goes, "Listen, do me a favor. From now on, what I want you to do, at the end of the day, just bring me all your cards. You don't need to come and ask me, if you run into something you wonder, yeah, come and grab me. There are lots of other people who need my input. You'll know when you need it. And in 6 months, nobody's going to be looking over your shoulder."
What great mentorship, what great guidance.
And it was one of the neatest gifts I ever had. I got to just do dentistry with people. I mean, it was really, really, really fun. And in hindsight, what I realized was I tried to find times that I could go ask him something and he could come and look. And I found that it was for two reasons. One is I wanted to get reaffirmed.
Right. Sure.
But I love being able to go back and forth about this stuff.
Yeah.
And he told us, he and his wife, Chris, took us out to dinner a week before graduation. So we were all done. And I said, "So what advice are you going to give us?" And he said, "Well, sometime in the next 5 years, you guys are both going to feel like buying some new furniture. Go to the Pankey Institute instead.
Hmm.
Then, when I was out for 2 years, when we were in Findlay, right at this job in Findlay, Ohio, and there was a dentist in Findlay. There were 16 dentists in Findlay, I think, at the time, maybe 14. Anyway, one of them was this guy everybody talked about. He's the best dentist in town. Oh yeah, you're in a good place, but this guy's the best dentist in town. By the way, he loves to mentor. So if you want to know about how to do stuff, he knows how to do all kinds of stuff. I mean, problem dentistry stuff, he can do that. And so I went and I got talking to him, and I remember thinking, I want to practice like he practices. And at one point, I had been taking cases to him, and the guy that I worked with was wonderful, but he didn't understand some of the stuff I was asking.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I think his last name was Baker. God, isn't that awful? I can see his face and I can't remember his last name. He said, I said, I know I didn't get any of this. How did you learn to do all this stuff? And he goes, I go down to the Pankey Institute, and that's where I go to learn. And I said, you still go now? And he said, yeah. I said, I went through what they have like officially as a curriculum a number of years ago, but we get back a few times a year, and a lot of us just get together down there and we talk about dentistry, and we do stuff just like this. And I remember at the time thinking, well, why would you? And I said it out loud. I said something about, well, don't you already do this? And he goes, not as well as I will tomorrow.
Oh, what a great line.
So I decided I would go. And Cheryl and I had this deal that we were going to go and do CE stuff. And then we said, okay, this is a good place to start. We're each going to do different stuff, and then we're going to teach each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the Pankey Institute, and I still remember this. I got in the car. It was a week. Because you had to go. Started on Sunday. You came home on Friday afternoon. You got done at Friday noon. You got to show up at Sunday at 1 p.m. You got done at Friday at noon. And so I get home. I came home Saturday because I stayed Friday nights, flew home Saturday. And she was there, and she gets out of the car. Toledo Express Airport. I mean, you can drive right up to
the runway.
I walked out, and
run up to the runway, pick you up off the door of the airplane.
So I get in the car because she goes around and sits on the other side so I can drive. And she gets out a clipboard. And she goes, okay, start telling me what you learned. And I remember, I never will forget this. I looked over at her and I said, you have to go.
Right. Yeah.
I had learned it wasn't just the dentistry.
Yeah.
It was the process. And it was real. That's what's the most important lessons I ever learned. And so we went through all that. Prior to that, however, one of the things was also an impetus, and he sort of sent me after my experience in Findlay. I met Pete Dawson. When I was doing my residency, they would allow us to plan a trip, and they would give us time off if we wanted to go and take some CE, if you could fund it. So I had called two places. I called a place out in California called the Pacific Institute because I heard they were coming to do a program, and that was Phil Whitener and Jim Pride. And it's a business thing. And I called and I said I wanted to come, and that I was a resident in GPR, and then I said, do you have a rate for that? Because I have to fund this myself. And they said, I don't know. And then this guy, can you hold? So I hold, and the guy came on the phone, big deep voice, and said, you're a dental, where are you a dental resident? And I told him, Cleveland, and said, oh yeah, and we're coming to Cleveland. He goes, you want to come? And I said, I'd love to come. And he said, okay, here's what all you have to do. I'm going to hand the phone back, write the guy's name. But all you have to do is when you give him all your information, you just come to that workshop. And when you get to the door, ask for Jim. So it turned out to be Jim Pride. I met him that morning. He sat me down up in the front row, sat me next to him at lunch for the next 2 days. And I learned that it's a business. And if you want to be able to do the dentistry you want, you got to understand that it is your business.
Yep.
That was awesome.
For those who don't know Jim Pride, Jim was really the person who help dentists understand that it's a business. And so many of our business consultants, our dental consultants, they owe their careers to Jim Pride. Jim's unfortunately passed. His legacy is actually a vineyard that I just recommended to my daughter. She's heading out to Napa in a few weeks. And I recommended going to the Pride Vineyard, which is a great vineyard if you like big, bold cabs and cab franks and stuff. But he was really the guy that helped us understand that we need to run our dental practices like a business, there had to be systems. He was like the first person to bring systems into dentistry. And so Jim Pride really was unfortunately passed very young, but he really was so influential in the way we practice dentistry today.
Oh man. And I got lucky.
Yeah.
I was interested in it because I knew I wanted to have a practice. And that's why I really went. And obviously we all have a reason for going to learn things, and you often come away learning way more than you thought you would learn.
Sure.
The other person that I went to a program for was a program called The Concept of Complete Dentistry. And it was Pete Dawson. And I remember at the end of the day just thinking, God, all this stuff, I don't understand half of what he's talking about. I didn't even get this.
Right.
So I went up and there's a whole bunch of people asking him questions, and I didn't even understand the questions people were asking. Here's what I remember about it. I was just listening because I was just so intrigued by his energy and his enthusiasm and excitement. It was in Cincinnati, Ohio. And there was a party going to be held that night in the room we were in. It was at the Omni Hotel downtown. And we're all there, and they're starting to clean the room. And so the guys are coming up and, saying, we need to do this. And Pete turned to the guy who was asking him, is there somewhere else you can go? And he said, is there somewhere we can go? And he said, well, you can go back there, because they had pulled all the tables out of this giant closet. If you want to go back in there for a while, we're going to be doing this for the next couple hours. So he walks in there with all these people, and it was probably 15 people crowded around him. And he sat down on the floor. And these people sat down and started asking him questions. He stayed in there till they threw us out. And I remember I called Cheryl. I said, you know what? I don't understand almost everything that they're talking about, because it's all about like making things work. I don't even understand how they know they're not working.
Right. This is all joint-based dentistry stuff that we were completely unfamiliar with.
I had no idea. It's just like, this is all new stuff.
Talking about Mars. It's like the surface of Mars.
Yes. What I said to Cheryl was, though, I said, but this guy he's old. He's probably 50, right? Back then, 45.
Right.
He's old. And he is so excited about this. The enthusiasm about what he's talking about is infectious. I need to know more about this. So before I left, I just went up and I thanked him. And I told him that. I said, I still have no clue about almost everything you said. I don't get it. But your enthusiasm makes me know that I want to know it. And he invited me to his office.
Wow.
So I made the trip down, met Dr. Roach, watched him work for a little bit on a day, and then he invited me down. Back then he was doing little things in the office for like 12 or 15 people. And he did those with me. And by the time I had been down to visit a second one, this is when it hit home again, because now it came up again. And he said, this is before I went, Dr. Baker had already told me some things. He said, you need to go to the Pankey Institute. So that's how I got there. And then I went through some stuff that would have been in the middle 80s. And in 1992, I think Irwin invited me to come down as a teaching assistant. And in 94, he let me lead it. He asked me if I would lead a workshop, and of course, as a visiting faculty. And so I started going down several times a year, and my interest in teaching got reignited. By then I had learned that dentistry is education. Today I realize that it's 100% that. In fact, one of my favorite things to tell people today is, the issue that we have is that our profession is modeled after medicine. Usually when people get themselves involved in medicine, they go looking for answers. 96% of the patients who walk into your door aren't looking for answers at all. They think they're fine.
Yeah.
That's a different. And then unfortunately, that means that's how education became such a big part of what we do. It's not just telling them what they have so they understand it. It's telling them what they have because they don't even know they have it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, they don't know they have an illness.
That is so different.
Yes, it is.
And then when I'm going to say regular medicine, in fact, I think the only group of physicians that we're like is plastic surgeons. And the difference between us and plastic surgeons is nobody walks into a plastic surgeon's office without knowing what they want.
They're going there for a purpose, where people are coming to us for maintenance.
And the upside of that is, for fun, dentistry has been built around the idea of prevention. We're going to keep you from needing our services if you can maintain a regular contact with us.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm in. But it also means then you got to sometimes help them understand why some of those services are necessary to help them get what they want in keeping their teeth for the rest of their life.
Well, I think that's what makes dentistry so complicated. And for our friends and colleagues who are not in dentistry, you cannot explain not only the physical aspect of the dentistry that we do, but you can't explain the verbal skills that you need to be able to appropriately and properly help patients understand the needs that are there and how to get them addressed. And for me, it took decades for me to be able to learn those verbal skills so I didn't scare people off and so I could explain it and help lead them through a process. But that was a huge learning process for me to be able to speak in a way and listen, more importantly, listen in a way to help patients get the care that they need.
And that I am so what you said second, because my first thing, what I had to be able to do was listen.
Yeah, I was terrible.
Well, yeah. I'm all excited about all the stuff I can do.
Yeah.
And I start talking to people about that and they're nowhere near. They're like, why would you ever want to do that on me?
Right.
And I didn't learn that for a while. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you start to figure some of that out, it just makes it so much more powerful.
For sure.
Somebody told me once that, is that not manipulative? And I said, well, help me understand this. It's only manipulative if I was in their spot, I wouldn't do it based on what they told me they want. Because they're sitting here telling me they want to keep the teeth for the rest of their life, and that they would prefer to avoid high risk.
Right.
Because I always ask that. How much risk are you willing to undertake? And one of my favorite discussions for that, I love that people I hate it if they have crack. If they have the crack in their teeth, I can't give you a really good prediction. One of my favorite things to talk about is cracks that have no stain.
Mm-hmm.
There is no literature, guys. There's no science.
Right.
It says, well, if it's in this part of the tooth or this part of the tooth or that part of the tooth, this is what you should do because this is what's going to likely happen, or this is the percentage of time it happens. There's nothing. So I love to put those up, and I like to say, this is a crack in your windshield. By the way, it's not going to hurt you until it does.
Right.
And the truth is, it may never, ever separate. And right now, I know it's not separated because there's no color in it. It's just a crack in something that is still firmly closed. By the way, if there was color in there, we'd be talking.
Right.
It's broken now. It's not just cracked, it's broken. There is stuff going through it that's bad. We have to talk about that. You don't have that. So what you and I got to figure out together is, how big are the dice you like to roll?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're willing to accept some risk, I'm willing to work on that with you and help manage this situation. Yep. And happy to do that. That means that I am going to be really careful, and so is everybody on my team, to look every time and say, is anything different? Are we seeing any other indicators? Because, by the way, maybe indicators will show up somewhere else in your mouth that will all of a sudden make that higher risk. What level of risk would you like? And then if people don't know how to answer that, but now we can get into conversation. That for me is, now I can listen to whatever they think. Because they get to the point where they start asking me. The way that I'll talk about that is this. Patients, when they first come to me, they don't know this is what they are. But most of them who come are clients. Clients are people who want to be involved in a collaborative process about what's going on. And I believe that dental patients have morphed into that over the years. It's no longer you go to the doctor and do what the doctor says.
One of the big problems, I believe, with young dentists, and problem that I had was we want to solve the problem for the patient. And so I think this is such important information, is that really engaging the patient in helping them make the decision that's right for them. And the right decision may be no treatment, but that's their decision. But how much risk are they willing to carry in that decision?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second step for me is they could be a patient. And the way I like to define a patient is this. And my favorite one is to use oncology, unfortunately. If I go to spend time with an oncologist, I want to be told what I should do. That's what came. Tell me what you believe is the thing I should do. And I'm listening to that because I walked in the door already owning something.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to say is that what they're looking for is a benevolent guide. You know, people who I'm going to work with you on this. And then the last one is a customer. Once you figure out what it is you're after, you become a customer. And customers want to buy it.
Yep.
I eventually want to work with a customer. I want the person to go, yeah, I should do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. How much?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because we do this all day.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not surprised. You go and you look at something, you go, I'm not, we're going to do that. And then it's this much money. What do? You don't go, well, now I'm not doing it. You go, okay, well, let's figure out how we're going to pay for that. You do it yourself.
All the time.
Sorry, I get back so easy on this stuff.
No, I think that's so important for all of us who are. I was just with the Marquette dental students yesterday or 2 days ago.
Cool.
And so I said, look, unfortunately we're all in sales. What we're trying to do is help patients get the treatment that's right for them. But don't kid yourself. You have to understand the communication skills necessary to be able to help the patients make those decisions, right? And I think the way you just voiced it, I thought that was just right on. So that is what it is.
For me, I don't know about you, but I've spent my life trying to explain things in a way that I could understand them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious, when you decided to leave your practice and then go down and be part of Pankey as a clinical director, that was a full-time position, correct?
Yes, it was.
So then did you stop seeing patients at that point?
I did. I sold the practice at Pemberville. I didn't have a Florida license when I first went. I did get a Florida license later that first year. I went and took the Florida board. And so then I was seeing a few patients. That continued through 2023. I still would see a few patients a year. Most of them were dentists, and most of them wanted to be restored somehow. But they would say, would you do it? And I would always say, you have wonderful people nearby where you don't have to come here to do it.
Right.
One of the benefits of being in a place like Pankey and other places that I taught is that you do get a network. Because if you get involved in sharing what you know with other people, you get a network of dentists around the country, and you can confidently send people places because you know people.
You know people.
I've seen the kind of stuff you can do, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it works. And so in that regard, I would just do a few cases a year, and that's what I did probably from 2003 until 2023. That's kind of what I did.
And what was that like? I'm curious, with going from someone who's full-time practice, you have your business of dentistry. I mean, you're a practicing dentist. What was it like then, just sort of like closing that door and opening the other door? Was that scary? What were you, I'm super curious what your emotions were as you're going through that.
Well, I knew that I really enjoyed doing it because I had been doing it on a, visiting faculty basis. And when I was offered the opportunity, I thought it was something I could really enjoy, which I did. I'm gonna say that part of that, in hindsight, was a little bit of ego about, I get to be the big shot, and and as I think of that in hindsight, it was part of that. I mean, I thought, well, how can I say no to that? I didn't think I was giving up something by leaving practice because I thought I could still sort of do it, but it was totally different. It wasn't the same
Right. Sure.
It was not being in practice. And in that regard, I realized that in hindsight, I mean, one of the things that I did at the beginning of 2023, I wrote it down. I said, I'm going to see more patients this year. Mm. What I actually wrote was, find a way to do more dentistry with real patients. That's what I wrote in January of 2023. So in September, they fired me. Be careful what you set as a parent, because you will do stuff that make it happen. And I say that there was lots of other reasons. Stuff happens, and I mean,
and that's at this. So just to fast forward for those who aren't familiar, you were at Pankey for how many years before?
2003 to 2008.
Okay, so 5 years clinical director.
I went to Seattle.
And then you had a friendship with Frank Spear, right? And that's sort of how all that genesis of
I had met Frank through a small group of people in the late 80s who got together and said, if we come out as a group, will you spend some time with us to put something together? And he did. So I got to know him, and that was kind of fun. And so we had a relationship, and I'm not going to go into all the stuff about what was going on at Pankey at the time, because if people who know Pankey know that it's up and down, sort of depending on how it's been managed.
Sure.
There were some issues happening. I chose to leave. 3 of us were there teaching full-time. Actually, there were 4 people there full-time, 4 dentists. And I realized that was not going to financially fit. We were bleeding. We had a lot of reserves when I started, and we were using all that up. And I just said, I just don't think this fits. And so I chose to leave, thinking that it would give everybody else a better chance to make it happen. And Cheryl and I had sort of decided at that time, we didn't know that we wanted to spend all of our life in Florida. We're not beach people. And I hate humidity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, God, it drives me nuts.
I hear you.
And so we said, so for that reason, it's not like a place I would pick to go and live. Not that I didn't like it.
Yep.
And so I left, and I was stopped in Las Vegas to take my last LVI course. It's one of my favorite questions to ask a group. I say, how many people in this room have been to LVI? I have my hand up.
Right.
Everybody's raising their hand. And so I always go, it's okay, really.
I'm Gary. I'm at LVI.
And you know enough that you can laugh at that.
Yeah.
Some people younger people may not realize. Let me just tell you, there was a time when there was all this back and forth about, let's just say, stuff got written and published that was probably largely inappropriate and maybe even not really totally true. There was a lot of emotion involved in talking about this place. And anyway, I learned a lot of good stuff there. I was on my way doing that.
Let me just, for those who don't know, LVI is Las Vegas Institute, and it was a neuromuscular-based dentistry. So instead of being joint-based dentistry, which is the Pankey philosophy, Dawson philosophy, Spear, Coyce, all sort of follow. Condyle should be seated in the superior anterior position in the condyle. Neuromuscular dentistry was much different. And back in the 90s, 2000s, I lose track of when that was sort of at its height.
Yeah, 90s and zeros.
They use muscular stimulators to allow the mandible to find a normal resting position. That's where they would build their occlusions, essentially.
Dr. Yankelson's.
Yeah. And it was all sort of poo-pooed by the dentists who followed joint-based dentistry. Reality is they probably had some stuff right. I think a lot of airway stuff that we've learned, I think they were right for the wrong reason.
Isn't that amazing? Though?
Yeah, right. But anyhow, so there was a lot of, so if you ever said that you went to LVI, people would look at you like you had crossed over to the other side. So anyhow, that's a little background on the LVI.
So Frank was in Las Vegas, and so he got a hold of me and he said, "Hey, I saw somewhere that you're going to be in Vegas. I'm going to be there. What are you doing?" And I saw him, and he said, "Let's have dinner." And so I told him that I was leaving Pankey, and he asked me if I would come to Seattle. So I went to Seattle and joined him up there, and then we wound up merging his education company with the Scottsdale Center to create Spear Education.
And you were there for like the whole thing, that whole transition period, right?
I was there, before. And I was there. I actually knew the people who were from there. They had actually offered me, when they were building it or thinking about it, they offered me the position running it. And I just, because I was at Pankey at the time, and I said, I'm concerned about your business model for this reason only. I said they were going to invite people to come, and they would create their own groups, and they could market it, and you'd pay them a percent. And I said, it's going to be a beautiful facility. It's going to be all that, but if I'm out there doing this, I'd probably go to a hotel, and I'll keep that extra 20% that you want to take for myself. So I think you're going to have a struggle. I hope I'm wrong, but you're going to have, and let's just say they had a struggle, because there was never a continuum. It was sort of just like a place to have stuff.
Right.
And so they knew they had to do something different. And when I was up with Frank, one of the things we talked about is we don't have a facility that really allows us to have bigger groups. And I knew about him, so we connected and got talking, and I thought we would just be kind of using space, but we wound up merging the two companies.
So you were part of Spear for then not quite 20 years, but almost 2 decades, right?
15
How many?
years.
15 years.
Yeah. January 1, 2008 is when I joined Frank. And in June of 2008 is when we created Spear Education.
It's interesting. We were talking before we started recording. I get a lot of questions from students and young dentists. Hey, I want to take CE. Obviously, DOT has our virtual platform, but they want to do in live stuff. And I say, in my mind, there used to be 4. I think now there's 3. I say you got your options of Pankey, Spear, Kois. There used to be Dawson. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Dawson these days. So we say Pankey, Spear, and Kois, and I think they all offer things differently. And I say, I think you got to sort of figure out how you want to learn. And I say, this is what I tell people. I say, if you work best like collaboratively, you like being in a community, then I think you should check out Pankey. My friends who've gone through Pankey, that's what they come back from it. They have great mentorship, and they have this great support, right? If you want to learn courses from just like awesome instructors, then go through Spear, because some of the finest dentists in the world are teaching at Spear. Just incredible.
Some of the finest teachers in the world too.
Yeah.
They're incredible.
Incredible.
The there is amazing.
And if you want to learn from the OG, if you want to learn, and really just understand the Kois protocols and stuff, then I think Kois is perfect. And if you're someone who is really likes direction and detail and needs sort of like a very organized instruction, I don't think anyone does it better than John and their team. Right. So I think you sort of figure out your personality and what your personality style is. And I think they're all 3 great learning institutions, but just very different in the way. And so I find it really fascinating, your experience with Pankey in the sort of in sort of this more of a mentorship, and then into Spear, which is awesome, but much more into sort of, let's get the didactics dialed down. And now sort of as we go back, and now as we started our conversation earlier, and now you're back at Pankey. And I find it absolutely fascinating how this boomerang, and now you're sort of back into that environment. And I want to know what that is like, having been out and then sort of coming back in. What is that like?
So this will play into the what some people have said is, I drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I drank it years ago. I mean, the Pankey Institute, I grew up at the Pankey Institute as a dentist. And there were a lot of other outside influences, and I have always tried to encourage people to go everywhere that you can, as long as it interests you. Go. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. The reason that I call the Pankey Institute sort of kind of home is that was where I grew up. It was the place that I chose to go regularly and routinely. But I did not stop going other places. That's why I went to LVI. Mm-hmm. I still went to stuff that Frank did. I tried it because I wanted to get this stuff. One of my favorite things is I would get asked often, and I still get asked today. So what is the difference between these places I can go to learn? And I say, well, let's start off with this first premise, because you said it beautifully. I love all the stuff that you said is exactly true. I always started off and try to say that. I don't say it as eloquently as you did about how the differences are. I thought you did that incredibly. I'm stealing a lot of that.
Feel free.
I always start off with this. Here's what we have to agree. First of all, Truth is truth. And none of those places have any copyright on any specific truth.
That's awesome.
It's the same message, delivered in a different way a little bit and with different things around it. And I use exactly what you said. If you want to go and get a cookbook from a person who I think creates the most detailed, he creates the cookbook. I have learned a ton of stuff from John. He's awesome. Got to spend a bunch of time with him when I was younger. John helped to develop for me my whole thought process around systems. It's why when I sit down today still, if I'm doing a case, I have a whole list of things. By the way, there's a whole bunch of places where it says take photo. I mean, that's the detail you go to. So that's telling you do this. That's how you train yourself to do that stuff. He's awesome. By the way, the truth that you'll learn there is no different than what you're going to learn at Spirit Education. You'll learn it a little differently in that it's going to be less cookbook-ish. But I will tell you, there is no one better than Frank, who took very complicated things and gave us step-by-step thought processes.
Yeah.
Difference for me between those two guys and how it comes across is that Frank's comes across as a suggestion. John will just tell you.
So true.
And that's awesome.
So true.
And the Pankey Institute is kind of a group environment. There's going to be a whole bunch of teachers involved, which makes it possible to create more community. What I mean by that is you probably, if you've heard of the Pankey Institute, somebody probably somewhere, if it's ever been talked about in a group, somebody said, oh yeah, that's that cult down in Florida.
That's what I heard when I was first out of school.
Outside of any group of people like that, it sort of feels like a cult because all these people know each other and they stay in connection outside. And by the way, that happens variably in other places, but one of the reasons it happens at Pankey is that by requirement, the Pankey Institute is required by its namesake that at least 50% of what is discussed is not about clinical dentistry. It's about people. And that was a requirement of LD Pankey because his philosophy was that dentistry is a result of us being willing to be in relationship with a person so we could help to decide what was the appropriate dentistry to offer them when they asked for it.
That's great.
It was his requirement. So guess what happens when you're in an environment like that? It's impossible for a community not to develop. And if you're not part of that community, at first, if you walk into the first time in a group of those people, they're all going to be talking to each other like they're best friends. They sort of are.
Mm-hmm.
The beauty is that I think what you're going to discover is that there is nobody involved in that circle who is not willing to spread apart and say, come on. That's what I think you'll find there. All of them are wonderful places to go. All of them you will be happy you went.
Yep.
If it's possible, when you're first learning, you pick one. Makes sense, because I'm going to stick on path. Guess what happens when you sort of learn how to do something? You never stop learning how to do it. Now I want to talk to everybody else who might say something a little differently or do something. What about that? Yeah, I never thought about that. And I might not get that there. And so I encourage people to go anywhere that your budget and your time allow you to go. Don't stop going. Don't think because you've learned something that you're not going to enjoy being there and you're not going to learn. When I left the Pankey Institute, many of my friends wanted to come and take something at this new place, at Spirit Education. You know what I recommended to almost every one of them? Facially generated treatment plan.
Totally. I mean, that was my first course with Frank. Absolutely.
Our first workshop.
Yep.
100% of them who said, who came. A lot of them said, isn't that like the first one? And they said, it is. I said, well, haven't I done all that stuff? And they said, yeah. That's why you'll love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
And all of them did it. All of them said that was the right thing to do. And said other people. I guess my point in that is this. I have been extremely fortunate, and one of the best things in my life is to be involved at a bunch of places and learn from some of the best people on the planet, and then be given an opportunity to have multiple experiences. I grew up at the Pankey Institute, and I love the place. I helped to create Spear Education. When it started, Frank Spear and I were the only dentists who were teaching workshops. And the people involved there now are still some of my closest and dearest friends. The people at every place that I've been, and I don't know Dr. Hess, but I know a lot of people who go and spend time with him at Dawson. And I'd never met him, but they are there getting the same stuff, because truth is truth. That's my point in this. Pick a place for a little while. Run the course so that you get the picture of exactly, okay, that's that. What you'll find is that the outcomes are going to be the same kind of outcomes. The path there can vary a little, but that's okay. Yes. And then don't be afraid to go and listen to some of that other path so you can build your own. That would be my recommendation. One of the reasons that I love this group too, one of my really dearest friends is a guy named Jim Otten. And one of my heroes is a guy named Bill Robbins. Some other time I'll tell you a story about why that is, but let me just tell you, he's always been one of my heroes since the day I met him. And when I was given an opportunity, Jim kind of called me. Let's just say I was having some immediate struggles after my separation from my last thing with, significance, and am I worth it?
Sure.
I mean, what is, because I get it. I know that it's partly about me. It wasn't about what I have to offer or any of that stuff. It was time to be done. Right. Sides for a couple of reasons, many reasons. Anyway, I get this call from these two guys. They're both calling me, and they invited me to be part of this thing. And you know what they're trying to create? They're trying to create a place for people who've been to any of those other places to come together and share the things we've learned.
Wow, that's so cool.
Which is awesome. I said, yeah, I'd love to be part of that. That would be a fun thing to try. Let's see if we can create a kind of a super study club. And the only difficulty and the thing that we struggle with is that at some point it gets too big not to be in the same room. And you got to figure out a way to get to know each other. And if it's 4 or 5 or 6 or 30 people, you can do a lot on a little screen.
Yep.
Yeah, it's tough when you got a crowd of 200 people and you can't even get them all on one screen that they're above the size of your pinky fingernail,
Yes.
That's different. And so it'll be interesting to try to see how do we put together things that would allow people to experience what we learned there. It's really fun because we get on and members just bring cases a lot of the time.
So for those who aren't familiar, right. Let me explain. So Bill Robbins, dentist down in San Antonio, still practicing a little bit. And Jim Otten's retired now, but has just a fabulous career. Both of them I know well and are just awesome. And they have what's called their Global Diagnosis Study Club. And if you don't know Global Diagnosis, Bill Robbins, Jeff Rouse, they started this 20 years ago. And I say it's a facially generated treatment plan on steroids. And it really looks more encompassing into airway, joints, and stuff like that. I think where facially generated treatment plan was phenomenal. This takes it to even like the next level. So you join them in this, I think, just wonderful platform that's going to help, like you say, dentists just really just even merge their ideas from all over, and then just have such great educators be able to just help them learn even more.
Well, yes. And I love it because I get to go on here every time I get out.
And it's a virtual study club, so people can do the study club from the comfort of their own couch. And I think it's like one meeting. Is it one evening meeting a month at this point? Is that sort of how the club is?
Well, yeah. Actually, they originally were trying to do 2 a month, and I finally said, that's 24. Why don't you aim it? if you want to aim at more than one a month, aim at like 20. Because twice a month, and it was on a Wednesday evening. Twice a month is a hard thing to commit to unless you're doing the same thing twice. And that might be something we do talk about, that maybe we do the same thing twice. So we're still kicking around how it works. We actually do Friday morning things. Before I joined you this morning, I was actually, we had a Friday morning, and it's a treatment planning session. So it was members just bringing some cases and then looking at stuff.
We do the same thing with DOT. We call it our coffee and donuts, and it's our Friday morning mentoring session. We do that once a month, and it's a phenomenal time. People to bring cases of their questions, and we just hang out, drink coffee, and sort of, just power thing together. So yeah, that's awesome. That's very cool.
It's fun.
If people wanted to get some information on the Global Diagnosis Study Club, how do they reach out to you guys?
Well, globaldiagnosiseducation.com. Or you can contact me, anytime. My name is Gary M. DeWood, DEWOOD at AOL.com is the email I use mostly these days. And I realize I just have to say this because I have it in all of my stuff. When I put up an AOL, I just watch the eyes in the group. Dennis is going to laugh at this.
I smile whenever I hear AOL. I just
smile. Gets big. Or like they look at the person next to them, and I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, what a dinosaur. So I actually have a second slide that pops up, and I tell them that story, and then it says I have to redefine your paradigm, because the fact is that I had that email address before most of you were alive. Right. That doesn't make me a dinosaur; it makes me a pioneer.
I'm with you. I like that much better.
Right?
Yes.
And I'll admit to the dinosaur part.
And you're doing some teaching at the Pankey, so people can go just Pankey. Is it Pankey.com or Pankey?
Pankey.org, I think. But I think there's we're Pankey.com and Pankey.org. And I am primarily what I'm asked to be involved with, and when he asked me is, we have a workshop called Essentials 2. The essentials are the 4 essentials, and that is sort of just like the flow through. That's the things that I said, if you go somewhere for the first time and you want to tie in, those 4 create the picture of what the restorative dental parts are of what we try to help people understand more and adapt to their practices. Outside of that, we do a lot of other stuff. The E2 one involves bite splint therapy and planning occlusions. I took the word equilibration out of my thing, and I say designing occlusion.
I like that.
Make teeth rich. So designing occlusion is what I love to think about, because when I started, and when you started still, I'm guessing it was mostly reductive because we didn't have materials we could put on there. You had to do ceramics or metal, gold specifically, if you wanted to design occlusions. And today, you don't have to do that.
Nope. Absolutely. I love that, designing occlusion. I love that.
Cool. Then for me, that just is, like I said, I had to say things in a way that I can understand.
Yeah, totally. Right?
Right. Understand them.
I agree 100%. Well, listen, I've taken so much of your time. This has been fascinating. Boy, I did not expect the path that we took down today, but it's so interesting hearing your path into dentistry, and just one of the great educators in dentistry. And we're so fortunate, Gary, that your brother went to take the DAT and dragged you along, and that you outscored him, which is really cool, having brothers, right? There's a certain sense of pride in that, so that's very cool. Despite his accomplishments in the chemistry world.
Since you brought up that closing, I will tell you this, because this is worth doing. My brother is an exceptional chemist. And since he didn't do well, he decided to do chemistry stuff. And let me tell you, chemistry was always the joke is I was actually a better chemist. I'm going to say that's not true. He said that, but we were the same. We were both really good and we loved it. However, because of the path that he was forced to take, this is probably about 10 years ago. He walked in. He now owns 16 companies all over the United States and actually around the world. He's got some plants in China also that are doing some things for him. Let's just say that his financial situation is substantially different. And one of my favorite things about that is this. Right before, this is back in 2000, 3 before I left. He came to Pemberville, and I remember he was coming for a dental appointment. So he's coming in to do something. He turned to me and he goes, I got to figure out what to do with $16 million before the end of the year.
Oh my God.
And I remember I stood up and I said, the only reason you're going is that I did really well on that test, so you wouldn't be a dentist. So I figure you owe me at least half of that.
How can you argue that?
The thing you have to remember, here's my sacrifice. Every one of your plants is working every day, all day. Doesn't matter if you're there or not. As soon as I lock that door, this is nothing but a liability.
Yeah, and that's the truth. That's the reality.
My brother did exceedingly well. He's exceedingly happy. And I'm going to even say he sort of became what I would call a relationship-based business person. This is a guy who, when he was selling his product to people himself, he would always be there for the first casting stuff. And if they had a problem, he would say, what time are you casting tomorrow? And he would be on a plane.
That's awesome.
So it was the same kind of thing. We sort of have the same job. I'm happy that he's so successful, and fate does fun stuff to you. I certainly don't regret that I'm not at that same level, because the one question I did learn to answer a long time ago was, how much is enough?
Yeah.
And I had more than enough my whole life.
Yeah. We've been blessed.
Lucky.
I agree. Listen, Gary.
Thank you for the time. Thank you for letting me come and talk to you, Dennis. This has been a real pleasure. Sometime I'd like to be able to, I want to reverse this, because I just want to hear more of your story.
Well, anytime we can sit down and have a beer or a cocktail, no one loves talking more about themselves than I do. So
I'll look forward to that opportunity.
Well, thank you. Again, for everyone out there, thanks so much for hanging out with us in our wonderful, wonderful conversation with Dr. Gary DeWood. And as always, yours for better dentistry. I'm Dr. Dennis Hartlieb. Well, thanks so much for listening or viewing our Sharecast today. If you enjoy this and you want to get more information from dental online training, then check us out at dothandson.com. That's one word, dothandson.com. And hey, be sure to share this with your friends and colleagues, anyone who you think might benefit from this Sharecast. And please be sure to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed our conversation. This podcast is edited by Luna Clark and includes original music by Chris Peterson. And again, thank you for listening. Yours for better dentistry. I'm Dr. Dennis Hartlieb.